When the Buddha lists the factors for awakening, he says there are some that are appropriate when the mind is sluggish. Those are the factors of analysis of qualities, rapture, persistence. Those are the qualities that energize the mind. Then there are the qualities that are appropriate when the mind is over-excited, over-energetic. Serenity, concentration, equanimity, those calm the mind down. You need all of them. It's a matter of finding balance. There's one quality, though, that's appropriate all the time, and that's mindfulness. And so it's especially important as we practice so we understand what mindfulness is. Sometimes you hear that mindfulness is simply an open, accepting awareness of things, simply noting what's happening and allowing it to happen without interfering. But that's actually equanimity. The Buddha himself defines mindfulness as the ability to remember for a long time what you've done and what you've said, and what other people have done and what other people have said. It's the ability to keep things in mind. And what do you keep in mind? One, you keep in mind the need to develop the skillful factors of the path and to abandon the unskillful ones. This applies to all the factors. Once you know what's right view and right resolve and wrong resolve, all the way down to right concentration or wrong concentration, you keep in mind your intention to develop the right side and to abandon the wrong. The Buddha compares this to being a gatekeeper on a frontier fortress. In a frontier fortress, you have to be very careful because there are spies and other people from the outlying countries. They want to come in and do damage in your fortress. So you have to be very careful who comes in, who doesn't come in. And mindfulness, the Buddha says, is like a wise gatekeeper. Recognizes who should be let in, who should not be let in, and lets in only those who should be let in. So you have to keep in mind this distinction. What kind of qualities in mind are skillful and which ones are not? Which ones do you want to develop and which ones do you want to abandon? There's another passage where the Buddha says mindfulness is like a goad. Most of us have gotten away from animal husbandry and farming and don't even know what a goad is. It's a stick you have with a sharp point, and use it to poke your animals when they're going in the wrong direction, or if they're not going when they should be going. So it's this ability to remember what's skillful and what's not, and to give yourself a little push in the right direction. That's what mindfulness does for you. And sometimes it's more than just a little push. There's another passage where the Buddha says, when you see that something unskillful has arisen in your mind, then you act as if your hair were on fire, and you do everything you can as quickly as you can to put it out, and you are relentless and mindful in doing this. So all these passages show that mindfulness is not just a broad, open, accepting state of mind. It serves a particular purpose, keeping in mind what you know about what's skillful and what's not, and reminding yourself that you really do want to pursue the skillful path and to avoid the unskillful one. This is why mindfulness and discernment usually go together. In Thai they have that phrase, sati panya. Mindfulness and discernment, it's the word for intelligence. It's the intelligence of a really practical person who knows the distinction between what's skillful and what's not, and keeps that in mind all the time. the Buddha's portrayal of how all the different factors of the path work together. Mindfulness, right view, which is the discernment factor, and right effort all go together. You know what's right and what's wrong, what's skillful and what's not. You keep that in mind, and you keep in mind your desire to do the right thing, as we chanted just now, to generate the desire to prevent unskillful qualities that haven't arisen from arising, and to abandon them if they have arisen, and to generate the desire to give rise to skillful qualities, and then once they're there, to encourage them to develop them. So you're not just sitting here watching things coming and going, arising and passing away, and say, well, that's that. You realize that your mind is the factor that shapes your life, and what it's going to do is going to have a huge impact. You keep that in mind. So when the mind begins to wander off, you use the goad of mindfulness and bring it right back. Give it a sharp poke. And sometimes all you have to do is just remind it, and it will come back. Other times it's a little bit more resistant. This is where if you use other techniques as well. But again, mindfulness has to keep all those various techniques that you've heard about and that you've actually put into practice and found that they work. You've got to keep all that in mind, because we do have this tendency to forget. And sometimes the forgetting is just a simple dropping of what we're trying to remember, and other times it's a willful forgetfulness, when part of the mind has decided it's not interested in the path at all and wants to go off and get a little pleasure on the side, fantasizing about this beautiful person, that lovely sound, these nice flavors, whatever you're fantasizing about. And when you're in that state of mind, you willfully forget the fact that you're sitting here and meditating, or that you're trying to follow a path of practice. That's when mindfulness has to be especially sharp in reminding you. So try to be very clear about what mindfulness does. We're not here just to watch things arise and pass away and try to be equanimous. I mean, there are times when equanimity is going to be needed, but not the type of equanimity that just kind of lets things take over, regardless of whether they're good or bad. You want to keep in mind the Buddha's teachings. You want to keep in mind the Buddha's example. You want to keep in mind whatever other teachings you've learned that are skillful, and your own discoveries of your own mind about what's skillful and what's not, and what works and what doesn't work. This is why mindfulness is useful at all times, regardless of whether the mind is sluggish or over-energized. You can't forget these things, because otherwise it's like having a water buffalo and you have no goad, you have no control over the buffalo at all. If you're trying to plow a field, the buffalo will just go anywhere at once, and then it'll stop. And the field never gets plowed. You never get done with your work. So remember that little voice inside that remembers to be heedful, that remembers to be on top of things, and remembering the importance of your actions. They really do shape your life. They really do shape your meditation. The decisions you're making from moment to moment to moment are important. Keep that point in mind, and you find that it really does help keep you on the track, keep you on track, keeps you at work. And if the work seems tiresome, remember that it's not all just work. There are the elements of serenity, concentration, rapture. all the good things about being on the path as well. But the mindfulness is the stick. You have to have both the carrot and the stick in order to get your field plowed. It's always good to start the meditation with thoughts of goodwill. Remind yourself that you do really want to be truly happy, and that's why you're here. The thought helps to focus you. Where you're going to look for true happiness, we have to look inside. Because you know that every happiness based on things that you see and hear and smell and taste and touch and think about eventually has to change. And if you place your happiness there, if you identify with those things, your happiness is going to have to change in ways that you don't want it to. So you have to look inside. What's deeper inside than these things? That's what we're looking for in the meditation. Unfortunately, the path to that happiness doesn't require that we have to cause anyone else to suffer. And the happiness itself places no burden on anybody at all. So we're on a good path, going to a good goal. And as one way of guaranteeing that we stay on the path, we spread thoughts of goodwill to others too. People close to our heart, people not so close, and then spreading out into ever-widening circles. That thought helps to open up the mind. As the Buddha said, it's like a large river of water. If you put a lump of salt in the river, you could still drink the water in the river. It wouldn't be too salty because there's so much water. But if you just had a little cup of water, put the salt in, you wouldn't be able to drink the water at all because so little water and so much salt. In the same way, if you carry around your own personal concerns all the time, any little pain can suddenly seem like a huge lump of salt. But if you think in larger terms, it makes the little pains a lot easier to deal with. This also parallels the way the Buddha approached his own awakening. In the night of his awakening, that first knowledge had to do with his own narratives. But before he focused on the present moment in his third knowledge, he went through the second knowledge, where he thought of all beings. Got a picture of the cosmos as a whole. So everybody passing away and then being reborn in line with their actions is because he saw the larger picture that he was able to see an important pattern, which he could then apply to his own experience of the present moment. Because if he had just focused on his personal narratives, there's a lot he would have misunderstood. As he said, sometimes you do good in one lifetime and then suffer in the lifetime immediately following. Sometimes you do bad in one lifetime, and in the next lifetime you enjoy something really pleasant. And if you don't see the larger pattern, you'd wonder, is there any connection between your actions and the results? And the same question applies to a lot of other issues in life as well. When you just look at yourself and are concerned about your own personal problems, your own immediate circle all the time, you miss some larger patterns. And that narrative can start weighing you down. But if you can air out your mind, thinking about all beings, get the larger picture, then it's a lot easier to come into the present moment with a sense of equanimity, a sense of solidity, confidence that this is something you can do, and it's something that's important. The chant we had just now on aging, illness, and death and action is only part of what the Buddha's recommendation was for how to reflect on those things. He says, reflect not only that you're subject to these things, you're subject to aging, illness, and death, separation, and you're responsible for your own actions, and your actions are going to bear results. He says, this applies to everybody. Men, women, lay, ordained, old, young. It's a universal principle. He says, when you think about it just concerning yourself, it helps to give rise to a sense of heedfulness, that you really have to be careful in what you do. But if you think about it with reference to all beings, it gives rise to a sense of samvega. There's this huge ocean of beings, and they're all subject to aging, illness, death, and separation no matter where you go. That, he says, helps to get you on the path, realizing it would be good to find a way out of this ocean, out of this flood. So when you've thought in these larger patterns, then you can focus in on the present moment. Look at where are these floods coming from? Well, they're coming from the mind. And you're more in the mood to look at them, because it's not just you being responsible for your own mistakes, which sometimes is hard to take, especially if you're still wound up in some narratives about who's right and who's wrong in your life. But when you see the larger pattern, you realize everybody's doing the same thing. Everybody is suffering from the same patterns. So it takes a lot of the personal sting out of what you're going to see where you've been unskillful. And because the sting is gone, it's a lot easier to be willing to adopt some new patterns that are more skillful. Because that's another thing that's good to think about other beings, the people who've actually followed the path. And they've gotten benefits. You can think they can do it, so can I. All those people in the past who were almost suicidal, yet they were able to turn themselves around and actually become noble ones, to become arahants, to find true happiness, to find true freedom. It's something that any human being can do. So it's good to think in these larger terms. It takes the sting out of your personal pains right now, your personal troubles right now. Especially when you look at the larger picture, not only in terms of all beings, but also the whole stretch of time. This stuff has been going on for a long, long time. When you come at this with a sense of enough, then you're really ready to settle down. And see what's going on right here in the present moment, what patterns in the mind need to be examined. Which ones need to be fostered, which ones need to be put aside. And we use the breath as our guideline in the beginning. You make up your mind you're going to stay with the breath, and anything else that comes in to pull you away, you can say, not now. No matter how good it may seem or how important it may seem, for the time being you say, no. I've got something else to do here. And then you realize if you're going to stay with the breath, you're going to have to make it interesting. You're going to have to make it comfortable. Because otherwise just watching in, out, gets pretty boring after a while, and you're going to start roaming around, looking for some way to find a sense of pleasure in the course of the hour here. But you can remind yourself, okay, the breath can get very comfortable if you give it space, if you give it time. If you jump around too much, you're not giving things an opportunity to develop and to grow. So one of the skills you have to learn is how to hover around the breath and protect it. The Thai word bakong, one that John Fuang used a lot. It's the same word they use when a child is learning how to walk. You walk behind the child and you have your hands out ready in case the child is going to fall. But you don't grab the child before the child falls. You have to let the child learn how to do its walking on its own. It's that same sort of gentle care. Unobtrusive but ready to step in when necessary. That's the kind of quality you want to bring to the breath. Take a couple of good long, deep in and out breaths and notice where it feels good. And if it doesn't feel good, there are two ways you can work with it. One is to notice that as you're breathing in, at what point does tension build up in different parts of the body? Can you keep breathing in without that tension's building up? Can you consciously relax it? It's building up in your shoulders, relax your shoulders and still breathe in. See if that works. If it doesn't work, then you can change the rhythm of the breath, make it shorter. In short and out long, or in long and out short. Faster, slower, heavier, lighter, deeper, more shallow. Notice what kind of breathing you like right now. This is one area in the practice where you really can indulge your preferences. What kind of breathing would feel really good? What would feel really gratifying? Which parts of the body could use some nice breath energy right now? And you play around in this, explore. Now you may find that by following the kind of breathing you really like right now, you set yourself up for some problems down the line. Well, that's a good thing to learn. You wouldn't learn it otherwise. You may get fascinated with the breath energy in one part of the body and overdo it. Or try to straighten things out in such a way that you start developing a headache, say, or a sense of tightness in the chest. These are all good things to learn because you're trying to learn cause and effect. And this is what makes the breath interesting. You begin to see that certain ways of focusing on the breath, certain ways of playing with the breath have a really good effect on the body. Other ways don't. That way you learn the principle of what's skillful and what's not, by observing cause and effect, and you learn how to make yourself a more reliable observer, which is what everything depends on in the practice. We know that discourse where the Buddha was talking to the Galamas and saying that don't just go by texts or reports or traditions or legends, which is the part that everybody remembers. But he also says don't necessarily go by your preferences or what seems reasonable. You take what seems reasonable and you test it in your actions to see what kind of results you get. And that means, one, a willingness to experiment, and two, a need to make your mind a reliable observer. So that when you test something, you can actually trust the results you see, or trust your estimation of the results. This is why we have to work on mindfulness and alertness and our powers of evaluation. Again and again and again. To sharpen them. To make them more reliable. So that's the main issue we're working on. Is to put the mind in a position where you can rely on it. As your powers of observation develop, you can apply them to more subtle things, not just the breath, but whatever comes up in the mind. You begin to notice certain ways of thinking that you've held on to for a long time. They're actually causing you stress and suffering. And keep in mind the possibility you don't have to suffer. That's what that larger picture is all about, because it's not just thinking about all those beings in the world who are suffering just like us. But remember that some of them have found a way out. That possibility is there. What it means is you don't have to suffer no matter how bad things get. The suffering is optional. And so if you find a particular way of thinking that's causing a sense of burden on the mind, ask yourself, what would it be like not to go with that thought? And sometimes it's easy to drop, and other times it's not so easy, which means there's a part of the mind that really likes that kind of thinking. It's got other agendas. Or it's hoping that that particular kind of thinking will bring happiness in the future, or there's a sense of obligation. You've got to think in that way. You've got to worry about this, you've got to worry about that. Remember that woman who came to see Ajahn Fuang, who after 2 days at the monastery was ready to go back home because she was concerned about the family back home, how they were going to get along without her. He said, just tell yourself you've died. After you die, they're going to have to learn how to get along. So give yourself a little bit of that freedom right now. Learn how to take that perspective on your thoughts. Okay, wherever there's stress, look for the cause and allow yourself to drop whatever's causing it. Allow yourself that freedom. Because that's when you're really showing yourself goodwill. And it turns out it's also showing goodwill for others as well, even the people for whom you're ordinarily responsible. Because if you're less weighed down by the responsibility, you find it actually easier to meet your genuine responsibilities when it's really necessary. So learning to let go is a gift not only to yourself, but to other people too. So try to keep this larger perspective in mind. Because it helps you to deal with things a lot more skillfully and a lot more appropriately for how really important or unimportant they may be. The Buddha says there are 3 factors of the path that hover around all the other factors. There's right view, which helps you to know what's, say, right speech or wrong speech, right action, wrong action, right mindfulness, wrong mindfulness. And then there's right mindfulness, which keeps in mind the fact that you want to develop skillful qualities and you want to abandon the unskillful ones. And then there's the actual effort, the right effort that actually does develop the skillful ones and abandons the unskillful ones. These things have to go together, because without right view and right mindfulness, your effort goes straying off in other directions. So as you put an effort into the practice, you have to understand it. Understand what you're doing, why you're doing. And once you've got that understanding, you've got to keep it in mind, because otherwise the effort goes in fits and starts. It doesn't build up momentum. For example, with right understanding, it's a series of images the Buddha gives of people who put a lot of energy into the practice, but they do it the wrong way and they don't get results. And as a result, they get discouraged. They begin to wonder if effort can do anything at all. You have to remember there are a lot of people in the Buddha's time who said, you put effort in the practice and you don't get any results regardless of how much you want them, because human effort is just too weak. Nowadays you get the idea that any effort is going to get in the way of the unconditioned, so you have to stop exerting any effort at all. Just kind of sit out there and let the mind be like a big open sky with clouds floating in and floating out without you doing anything at all. But that wasn't the Buddha's approach. Instead, you have to understand where effort is best applied. It's like trying to get milk out of a cow. You twist the horn, you're not going to get any milk. You twist the horn more and more and more, put a lot of effort into twisting the horn, and it doesn't make any difference. You're still not going to get any milk. At that point, it's easy to get discouraged and think, well, maybe effort is not a good thing. The problem is not so much with effort in general, it's your misunderstanding of where to apply it. You pull at the udder, you get the milk. You don't have to pull hard either. You put the effort in the right spot, and you're going to get results. And then you've got to keep that in mind. Because it's so easy as you're sitting here meditating and you start focusing on the breath, and then you forget. You're off someplace else. Or you get distracted by something in the breath itself. Things get nice, things get comfortable. And as John Fuhn would say, you sort of let go with your hands and feet and just kind of fall into the pleasure. Forgetting that the pleasure has to come from causes, and if you abandon the causes, the pleasure is going to disappear after a while. That's something you have to watch out for. It's not just the distractions in the meditation that are going to be troublesome. Sometimes some of the good things come up. Ajahn Lee has a whole list of good things in the meditation. A lot of people meditate so they can get visions. They want to see something. That's often one of the first questions you're asked in Thailand when people find out that you meditate. When you meditate, what do you see? Hoping that you've been seeing lottery numbers. Or spirits of the dead, or whatever. That's a big distraction. Even the sense of rapture that can come in a meditation, that can be a distraction too. The sense of pleasure, ease, that can be overwhelming. If you see that coming along and you just reach out for it, you're going to miss everything. You're going to leave the breath, and your meditation will float around for a bit. And then you come out and wonder where you were. So this is why mindfulness is such an important part of the concentration. You've got to keep your breath in mind. If you're not focused directly on the breath, well, at least keep the fact that you're dealing with feelings and mind states. Any one of the 4 frames of reference. And if you're going to focus on feelings, don't just wallow in the feeling. Remember, you're looking for the cause. So that takes you back to the breath on the one hand, and it takes you back to the steadiness of your gaze on the other. We've got to keep in mind the fact that this is work that we're doing here, even though it can be very pleasant. You don't want to be the sort of person who does a little bit of work and then gets your first salary check and then you disappear for a week. You should go off and spend your money. And when you've run out of money, you have to come back and ask for the job again. If you keep this up, you're never going to get a raise. You have to realize that the progress comes by sticking with the breath in its various manifestations. If you're not sticking with the in and out breath, try to stay with a sense of breath energy suffusing the body. Make sure that every part of the body is nourished by that kind of energy. You stop twisting the cow's horn, but you actually put effort in. You're going to pull at the udder. Another image the Buddha gives is trying to get oil. But you grind gravel. Now, gravel doesn't have oil. All you get is gravel dust. If you want oil, you can grind sesame seeds, or any plant that has oil. The same with the meditation. You've got to know where the effort has to be focused. You're focused on the steadiness of your gaze. You don't want to focus on anticipating things. I'm going to call this evening from someone who wanted to know how long it was going to take to attain stream entry. And she was hoping it was in the matter of months. And as I told her, you can't focus on that. Where are you going to look for stream entry? You've got to look right here at your breath. As with any journey, you have to focus on where you're placing your feet. If you have an imaginary image of what the goal is going to look like, you can't walk on that image. The image is not going to take you there. It may motivate you, but the actual getting there has to be in watching where you're taking your step to make sure you're on course and that you're not going to step on something slippery and fall. So you focus the effort right here. This is constantly coming back to the breath, to your frame of reference. And whatever comes up, you want to deal with it skillfully. This is what the frames of reference are all about. They're not just simply things that you watch coming and going and you don't do anything. I was reading a while back someone saying that there are basically two paths. One is the path of right mindfulness, the other path is the path of right effort. In the path of right mindfulness, you don't do anything, you just watch things arise and pass away and let them sort of sort themselves out. Whereas the path of effort, you put in a lot of effort to getting the skillful things to come and the unskillful things to go away. The idea being that the first path was the one that used more discernment and was wiser and easier. But I've never seen that path go anywhere. I've never seen the Buddha teach that path. For him, right mindfulness, right effort have to go together. You remember to apply right effort, and you remember where to apply it because you've been learning lessons in your meditation, either from Dharma talks you've heard or from your own reading or your own practice. You learn your lessons, you try to keep them in mind so you can apply them. And then you gain your own sense of touch as to how much you have to push. Sometimes you're very observant, but you don't do much. You want to watch what's going on, especially when you can't figure something out, when all the different approaches you've applied in the past don't seem to work, and then just watch for a while. But when you have something that works, go ahead and do it. Because the frames of reference are there to remind you. These are the things you watch out for, and when you see them arise, remember there's a duty with regard to them. You've got the Four Noble Truths, and they're telling you, you do this. If you run into any stress or suffering, you want to comprehend it. If you can see what's giving rise to that stress, you want to let that go. And so the factors of the path, everything from right view to right concentration, those are things you're trying to give rise to if they're not there, and then you develop them. And then we begin to realize what the end of suffering is like. So there are duties with regard to everything that's listed there in the frames of reference. And you keep those frames of reference in mind so you can remember, oh, when sensual desire arises, that's something you want to abandon. And how do you do it in such a way that it's effective? When rapture arises, how do you develop that in a skillful way? When serenity arises, how do you develop that in a skillful way? When ill will or sloth and torpor arise, how do you abandon those things, not get sucked into them? So you maintain your mindfulness so you can remember what's the right thing to do right now, and then that's how you apply your effort. So you really do get the milk, you really do get the oil. Because you're focusing your effort in the right place. And you're applying the right kind of effort to the right place. Take a few deep, long in and out breaths. And think of the breath energy filling the body. When we talk of the breath energy being full, it's not a matter of having your lungs stuffed with air. It's more that the energy channels throughout the body are open, and they feel saturated with comfortable energy. So try to notice where in the body you have that sense of fullness right now. And protect that spot. As you breathe in, protect it as you breathe out. In other words, don't squeeze it, don't pull it. Think of it floating right there. And as for any spots that don't seem to have a sense of fullness, allow it to develop. Some people feel it most easily in their hands, other people feel it most easily in the chest. It really varies from person to person where you're going to feel it first. But once you notice that there's an area that does feel relatively full of nice energy, think of it spreading out from that spot. This is something you can't push or pull. You allow it to spread at its own rate. And tell yourself you're in no hurry. You don't have to anticipate how soon it's going to happen, how long it's going to take. It's something that happens right on the cusp of the present moment. So if you're leaning too much into the future, you're not going to see it. If you're leaning back into the past, you're not going to see it. Try to think of yourself being balanced right here. The image the Buddha gives is of a mustard seed on the tip of an awl. A-W-L. Like an extremely sharp nail. Now, to develop this sense of fullness, this sense of well-being, requires that you pay very careful attention to the breath, and you be very meticulous in how you evaluate the breath. How is it feeling right now? When you breathe in, does the breath energy spread smoothly, or does it feel like you're pushing or pulling it too much? What we're working on here is something that's called piti in Pali. You can translate it as a rapture, you can translate it as fullness, you can translate it as refreshment. The idea is it feels really good, really nourishing. The Buddha talks about it as one of the energizing factors of awakening. And it's also kind of food. There's a passage where he says that we feed on rapture like the radiant gods. And the problem with the word rapture is sometimes it seems too intense for the way some people are experiencing it. Some people feel it as a tingling through the body, their hair standing on end. For others it's gentler, just a sense of really balanced, full well-being. Some people feel it in waves coming over the body. And some people it's so intense that the body starts moving. And the intensity is not a measure of the intensity of your concentration. It's more a measure of how starved the body has been feeling. If it's been feeling really starved, it's going to be extremely intense. So regardless of how you experience it. Sometimes you may want it to be intense, but it's not going to be intense. That doesn't matter. Be very patient with it. Again, if you start pushing it too much, it withers up. Have a strong sense of allowing the energy to be there. And if it's going to spread, it's going to spread at its own rate. You just try to maintain your balance. Right there in the cusp of the present. And it'll do its own thing. This is a really important part of the meditation. And John Fuang used to say that it's like your mind's like a machine, and it needs lubricant. Otherwise it's going to dry up. Your practice gets dry if there's no sense of real refreshment and well-being. He talked about one time being alone up in the forest in northern Thailand. And what kept him going through the day was his ability to tap into this when he needed it. To realize that it's waiting there for you in the present moment. Just look really carefully and give it some space. In the beginning it may not seem like much, but you've got to give it a chance. It's like that old fable of the mouse and the lion. And the lion catches the mouse and then lets it go, and the mouse says, well, maybe someday I'll return the favor. And the lion laughs. And then a while later the lion is caught in a net, and the mouse comes and eats away at the net and frees the lion. So don't disparage little things. Don't disparage weak things, because they can grow. They can get stronger. So wherever in the body there's a feeling of, feels okay, allow it to stay okay. The word that John Fuang would use is bakong, which means to hover around something to protect it. And try to develop that same attitude of hovering around these sensations in the body. Don't push them or squeeze them too much. Give them their space. Just protect them so that nothing comes in and steps on them. As for any questions the mind may have about how long this is going to take or how much longer we're going to be sitting here, just drop them, drop them, drop them, let them fall away. Try to find a sense of balance right here. Because right here is where all the good things happen. Where all the important things happen as well. Because if you have this sense of fullness, then you begin to notice the movements of the mind, and you see where the mind is hungry, and how it often goes out to look for basically junk food to assuage its hunger. But you realize you don't have to do that. You've got something really nice like right here. Why go out and look for trouble? Greed, aversion, and delusion are like strong cases of hunger. And they're never really satisfied. When you act on these things, there may be a little bit of fullness and a little bit of energy that comes, but then it goes. It's like food that's bad for your health. And here's something that you've been carrying around with you all the time, the potentials in the body. And John Lee talks about this a lot, that the body has all kinds of potentials that we rarely take advantage of because we don't let the mind get quiet enough to allow them to show themselves. So give this potential for fullness, a sense of refreshment. Give it some space. Give it some time. And you find that it really can strengthen your practice, give you a source of energy that you can tap into when you need it throughout the day, whether you're in formal meditation or not. These potentials are always there. When you can recognize them and know how to allow them to grow. You've got a constant source of food, a constant source of energy that you can take wherever you go. Take some good, long, deep in and out breaths. Get a sense of what kind of breath energy your body needs right now. If you're feeling tired, you may need some energizing breath. Long in, short out seems to help that way. Or whatever way of breathing you find that gives more energy to the body. If you're feeling tense, try to breathe in a way that's more relaxing. Short in, long out can help. Or whatever way you find helps to calm the body down, calm the mind down, help to give rise to a sense of serenity and ease. This quality of serenity is one of the factors of awakening. As you remember, there are two sides to the factors of awakening. There are those that are energizing and those that are calming. And serenity is the first of the calming factors. You can develop it in two ways. In fact, you want both kinds of serenity, i.e. bodily serenity and mental serenity. Bodily serenity, you work with the breath. Remember the Buddha's instructions that once you're aware of long breathing, short breathing, try to make yourself aware of the whole body and then notice the effect that the breath is having on the body. And try to make that effect more serene. Make it more refined. Try to breathe in a way that's gentle to the body. This helps to calm things down within the body. The different processes calm down. Whatever tightness you may feel here or there in the body, think of it dissolving away. If there's a sense that the breathing requires a lot of effort, just remind yourself the breath is going to come in and out on its own. There are pores all over your body. You don't have to pull it in or push it out. The breath will come in naturally, go out naturally. Any perception you can hold in mind that helps to make the breath easier. Experiment to see what way of picturing the breath to yourself helps to make the process of breathing more serene. At the same time, you want to develop mental serenity as well. Calm the mind down. This also has to do with your perceptions, but it's more perceptions of how things are in your life. Any perception that allows you to let things go, at least for the time being. Let go of your concerns for your work, your family, the world at large. You can't be responsible for everybody 24/7. You've got to have time for yourself. And realize that the world will probably run perfectly fine without you. You're going to have to let it go someday anyhow, so practice letting go now. So in this way you make the body more serene and the mind more serene at the same time. These are qualities that help give rise to concentration. Another way of making the mind more serene is to develop the Brahma Viharas, the sublime attitudes, immeasurable goodwill, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable empathetic joy, immeasurable equanimity. These thoughts are soothing to the mind. In the beginning you have to work through them. You ask yourself, is there anybody out there for whom you cannot feel goodwill? And certain faces will probably appear in your mind. And you have to remind yourself, nobody benefits from seeing those people suffer. And often, if they suffer, they come back, they get more vengeful. So it's not going to help the world in any way at all to wish they're suffering, to wish them ill will. Same with compassion. There are plenty of people out there suffering, and there are also people who are creating the causes for suffering. You have to have compassion for both. When you realize that, and you can have compassion even for the people who are creating suffering, that takes a lot of the edge off of your inability to let go of the world. It allows you to put things down for the time being. The same with empathetic joy. Is there anybody out there for whose good fortune you can't feel happy? Again, realizing that you're being jealous of their good fortune doesn't help. Or you're feeling that it's not right that they've got that good fortune. You have to remember someplace in the past they must have done something right. Think about yourself. Maybe someday you're going to come into good fortune. Do you want other people around you to be jealous? Well, no. And remember, empathetic joy isn't just for people who are experiencing good fortune, it's also people who are creating the causes for good fortune, creating the causes for happiness, whether they're experiencing that happiness yet or not. You rejoice in the fact that they're doing good. That's a calming thought. It helps make the mind more serene. And of course, there's equanimity. Realizing that each of us is the owner of his or her own actions. There's only so much in this world that you can exert any control over at all. And the prime thing you can exert control over is your own mind. So by working on your mind, you're going to help other things. Focus your attention here, and the effects are going to spread out, which means you can begin to let go a lot of your concerns for things out there, the things you can't control. To whatever extent you can control things, it comes under your ability to train the mind well right now. This helps to focus you in, helps you put other things aside. You can reflect on your own virtue, you can reflect on your own generosity. These are calming thoughts as well. Realizing that even though your virtue may not be perfect, you've got some good things that you've done in the past. Your generosity may not be perfect, but there are areas where you've helped other people, either through material gifts or gifts of your time, gifts of your forgiveness, gifts of your knowledge. All of these ways of thinking are ways of helping get the mind more serene, so it's able to settle down in the present moment with a sense of well-being. The sense of well-being is important because concentration requires it. It's an important part of the path. Sometimes you hear people saying that you've got to be aware of getting stuck on a sense of pleasure, a sense of bliss, or a sense of well-being. But the Buddha reminds us that this kind of well-being is blameless. There's so many other ways that people have of looking for pleasure outside that are not blameless at all. cause trouble for themselves, cause trouble for other people. This form of well-being is skillful. It's worth developing. And the danger of getting stuck here is extremely minor compared to the dangers of looking for your pleasure elsewhere, because the nature of the mind is that it wants pleasure. If it can't find it inside, it's going to go looking outside. If you can't produce your own food, you're going to go looking for food from other people. Of course, you know what you get from them mainly. As John Lee says, it's the food they spit out, the words they spit out. That's not good eating at all. So as long as the mind is going to look for pleasure, learn how to create it inside in a way that's blameless, in a way that's skillful. And it's normal that as you're working on this and you find that you aren't getting results, there will be a certain amount of attachment, there will be a certain amount of clinging. That's part of developing the skill. It's what keeps you interested in this, working at it, allowing it to capture your imagination. And as with so many other aspects of the path, you cling to it for a while, and then when it's done its work, then you learn how to let it go. Because if you don't have this to hold on to, remember, it's part of the raft. If you're not holding on to the raft, what's happening to you? You're falling down into the river and getting washed away. So the sense of ease, well-being, serenity is a really important part of the practice. Your ability to induce it is one of the really necessary skills. So the mind isn't sneaking out and trying to find its food someplace else. So don't be afraid of this ease. Don't be afraid of this pleasure. Learn how to use it. It's healing for the body, it's healing for the mind. It is one of the necessary factors for awakening. So learn how to give rise to it, learn how to maintain it, learn how to use it. Because it's an important skill in your repertoire. Take a few deep, long in and out breaths. And think of the breath energy filling the body. When we talk of the breath energy being full, it's not a matter of having your lungs stuffed with air. It's more that the energy channels throughout the body are open, and they feel saturated with comfortable energy. So try to notice where in the body you have that sense of fullness right now. And protect that spot. As you breathe in, protect it as you breathe out. In other words, don't squeeze it, don't pull it. Think of it floating right there. And as for any spots that don't seem to have a sense of fullness, allow it to develop. Some people feel it most easily in their hands, other people feel it most easily in the chest. It really varies from person to person where you're going to feel it first. But once you notice that there's an area that does feel relatively full of nice energy, think of it spreading out from that spot. This is something you can't push or pull. You allow it to spread at its own rate. And tell yourself you're in no hurry. You don't have to anticipate how soon it's going to happen, how long it's going to take. It's something that happens right on the cusp of the present moment. So if you're leaning too much into the future, you're not going to see it. If you're leaning back into the past, you're not going to see it. Try to think of yourself being balanced right here. The image the Buddha gives is of a mustard seed on the tip of an awl. A-W-L. Like an extremely sharp nail. Now, to develop this sense of fullness, a sense of well-being, requires that you pay very careful attention to the breath, and you be very meticulous in how you evaluate the breath. How is it feeling right now? When you breathe in, does the breath energy spread smoothly, or does it feel like you're pushing or pulling it too much? What we're working on here is something that's called piti in Pali. You can translate it as a rapture, you can translate it as fullness, you can translate it as refreshment. The idea is it feels really good, really nourishing. The Buddha talks about it as one of the energizing factors of awakening. And it's also kind of food. There's a passage where he says that we feed on rapture like the radiant gods. And the problem with the word rapture is sometimes it seems too intense for the way some people are experiencing it. Some people feel it as a tingling through the body, their hair standing on end. For others it's gentler, just a sense of really balanced, full well-being. Some people feel it in waves coming over the body. And some people it's so intense that the body starts moving. And the intensity is not a measure of the intensity of your concentration. It's more a measure of how starved the body has been feeling. If it's been feeling really starved, it's going to be extremely intense. So regardless of how you experience it, sometimes you may want it to be intense, but it's not going to be intense. That doesn't matter. Be very patient with it. Again, if you start pushing it too much, it withers up. Have a strong sense of allowing the energy to be there. And if it's going to spread, it's going to spread at its own rate. You just try to maintain your balance. Right there on the cusp of the present, and it'll do its own thing. This is a really important part of the meditation. And John Fuyang used to say that it's like your mind is like a machine, and it needs lubricant, otherwise it's going to dry up. Your practice gets dry if there's no sense of real refreshment and well-being. He talked about one time being alone up in the forest in northern Thailand. And what kept him going through the day was his ability to tap into this when he needed it. To realize that it's waiting there for you in the present moment. Just look really carefully and give it some space. In the beginning it may not seem like much, but you've got to give it a chance. It's like that old fable of the mouse and the lion. And the lion catches the mouse and then lets it go, and the mouse says, well, maybe someday I'll return the favor. And the lion laughs. And then a while later the lion is caught in a net, and the mouse comes and eats away at the net and frees the lion. So don't disparage little things. Don't disparage weak things, because they can grow. They can get stronger. So wherever in the body there's a feeling of, feels okay. Allow it to stay okay. The word Ajahn Fuang would use is bakong, which means to hover around something to protect it. And try to develop that same attitude of hovering around these sensations in the body. Don't push them or squeeze them too much. Give them their space. Just protect them so that nothing comes in and steps on them. As for any questions the mind may have about how long this is going to take or how much longer we're going to be sitting here, just drop them, drop them, drop them, let them fall away. Try to find a sense of balance right here. Because right here is where all the good things happen, where all the important things happen as well. Because if you have this sense of fullness, then you begin to notice the movements of the mind, and you see where the mind is hungry, and how it often goes out to look for basically junk food to assuage its hunger. But you realize you don't have to do that. You've got something really nice like right here. Why go out and look for trouble? Greed, aversion, and delusion are like strong cases of hunger. And they're never really satisfied. When you act on these things, there may be a little bit of fullness and a little bit of energy that comes, but then it goes. It's like food that's bad for your health. And here's something that you've been carrying around with you all the time, the potentials in the body. And John Lee talks about this a lot, that the body has all kinds of potentials that we rarely take advantage of because we don't let the mind get quiet enough to allow them to show themselves. So give this potential, potential for fullness, a sense of refreshment. Give it some space. Give it some time. And you find that it really can strengthen your practice, and give you a source of energy that you can tap into when you need it throughout the day, whether you're in formal meditation or not. These potentials are always there. When you can recognize them and know how to allow them to grow. You've got a constant source of food, a constant source of energy that you can take wherever you go. When the Buddha lists the factors for awakening, equanimity comes at the end of the list. Which gives the impression that it's the highest of the list. And in one way it is, but in many ways it's not. It's also listed as one of the factors that's useful at some times. In other words, when the mind is overly excited, overly energetic, overly worked up about things. Equanimity is one of the calming factors. It goes together with serenity and concentration. When your energy is too low, that's not the time to be developing equanimity. You have to work on the factors that are more energizing. Analysis of qualities, rapture, persistence. So you have to use your equanimity together with your discernment to figure out what's just right. There's a story that Ajahn Chah told about one time he was invited to the palace in Bangkok with a couple of other Ajahns. And the king at the time was worried about some political problems, demonstrations in the streets, and after the meal he asked the Ajahns what to do. And the other two Ajahns were more senior to Ajahn Chah, so they spoke first. And they both recommended that the king develop equanimity. When it came to John Cha's turn, he said, well, yes, you need to develop equanimity, but you have to develop it together with discernment, knowing what to accept and what not to accept, or what not to be equanimous about. This connects with two principles. One is that there are some things where you can make a difference, and those things you don't want to just leave alone. If you can make a difference for the better, that's what you focus on. Leave equanimity for the things where you really can't make a difference. The other principle is that there are some things in the mind that respond just to your watching them. In other words, certain kinds of greed or aversion or delusion come up, and when you recognize them for what they are, it's as if they get embarrassed. They just go away. There are other instances, though, that are not embarrassed at all. They're firmly entrenched. They've got lots of arguments, lots of justifications. And you can sit there and watch and watch and watch, and they're not going to go away. They may go away after a while, but they're going to come back and keep coming back until you dig down and do something about them. That's why the Buddha says you have to use the fabrications of exertion. In other words, you use the way you breathe, you use the way you think about things, evaluate things, you use your perceptions and feelings to deal with those problems, to figure out where they're coming from and what you can do to undercut them, so that eventually they don't come back. So you need to use your discernment together with your equanimity to know when you let things be and when you don't. And it's important that you recognize there are basically three levels to equanimity. The first one is the one the Buddha taught his son when he was first teaching him meditation. First instruction: make your mind like earth. People spit on the earth, people throw dirty things on the earth, but the earth doesn't recoil. Make your mind like water. People use water to wash dirty things away, but the water isn't upset. Make it like fire, wind. Fire burns dirty things, wind blows dirty things away, blows them around. But the fire and the wind aren't affected by them. So as a very beginning instruction in meditation is you have to learn how to make your mind really solid, not run away from unpleasant things. This is where equanimity is combined with your powers of endurance. Now, the Buddha is not saying that you just make the mind like a lump of earth, totally unresponsive. The purpose here is so you can watch things carefully and watch them in a reliable way. If you're the sort of person that runs away from negative things, you're never going to know them. You're never going to understand them. So we're not here just to put up with things or be equanimous. We're here to endure them so we can understand them, how they come, how they go, learn how to observe them. This is shown in how the Buddha followed up those instructions. After telling Rahula to make his mind like earth, he then taught him the steps for breath meditation, which involve a lot of proactive involvement with the breath. You're not just sitting there letting it come in and go out any old way, any old which way. In fact, the Buddha criticized those who practice breath meditation just letting it come in, go out, and trying to be equanimous all the time. You try to train yourself to breathe aware of the whole body. You try to calm down the effect that the breath has on the body. Breathe in a way that gives rise to rapture, that gives rise to a sense of pleasure and ease. Learn to breathe in a way that calms down the effect of your feelings and perceptions on the body and on the mind. And while you're breathing in and out, if you see that the mind needs to be gladdened, you gladden it. If it needs to be steadied, you steady it. If it needs to be released, you release it. In other words, in this case, equanimity is the foundation for acting skillfully, making a difference where you can. So that's the first level of equanimity. The second level is it level that comes when you really can get the mind to settle down and be still. So there's a sense of ease and rapture, and then the ease and rapture fade away, and you're left with equanimity. This is where the mind is really solid and even more observant, aware all around. And this is the kind of equanimity you can use to watch things in the mind. And as we said earlier, you begin to notice that with some of the defilements in the mind, and they are defilements. We don't usually like to use the word defilement, but that's what they are. They cloud the mind, they darken the mind. Just watch them with equanimity and they fade away. Those are the ones that aren't really deeply rooted. So this is the equanimity that comes from concentration. That's useful in some cases in dealing with the problems of the mind, because you begin to see the mind has all kinds of ways of creating problems for itself. And when you see that it's superfluous, it's very easy to let go. That leaves the deeper problems. These are the ones where you really do have to figure them out, understand where is this coming from, exactly why does the mind go for greed, aversion, and delusion. Why does it like these things? As the Buddha said, if you're going to go beyond these defilements, you have to figure out, one, how they come about, how they disappear, and how they're going to come back again after they've disappeared. And figure out what's their allure. Why do you like them? What is there about greed that you really like? And usually it's something you don't want to admit to yourself, so it's hard to see. This is why equanimity is, again, a useful foundation for seeing these things. So you can finally admit to yourself, well, yes, there is that element in the mind, there's that desire, there's that taste in the mind that really likes these things. And then you compare that with the drawbacks. Is the taste worth the price you pay? And it's amazing how the mind can very easily magnify the taste and try to minimize the drawbacks. And again, the equanimity of concentration is a good foundation for seeing this, because as you get a greater sense of well-being and stability in the mind, there's less hunger. When there's less hunger, you don't fall for the things that look like food and make you pay a heavy price in the end, because you've got better food already. So as you use this foundation of equanimity for analyzing things, understanding things, you finally get to the point where you can let them go. This gives rise to an even greater level of equanimity. It's the equanimity that comes when you found true happiness. There's nothing else you have to struggle for, and you look at all the different things in the area of sight, sound, smells, taste, tactile sensations, and ideas where you used to go foraging for food and you don't feel any desire to go looking there anymore. You've got something better. So equanimity is one of the byproducts of reaching the goal. It's not the essence of the goal. Sometimes you hear the factors of awakening being described as descriptions of awakening itself, but that's not the case. They're part of the path. The goal is something even beyond. And as the Buddha said, it is the highest happiness. From the outside it may look like equanimity, but inside it's a totally satisfied happiness. So there's the equanimity that's a product of the practice, and there's the equanimity that functions as a factor in the practice. And it's the levels that factor into the practice. Those are the ones we have to pay attention to. The one that's a byproduct, it's going to happen on its own. But the ones we work with, developing the equanimity that allows us to endure things. So we can develop an even deeper equanimity that allows us to see things really clearly, very deeply in the mind. Those are the ones you want to focus on, because those are the ones you can do. Those are the ones you can be responsible for. And as for the results, they'll take care of themselves. But it's always essential that you understand that equanimity is one of the factors. It's not the whole path. And you need to use your discernment to figure out when it's appropriate and when the more proactive side has to come in. It's the discernment that does the real work. So make sure that it's as sharp as possible. This is one of the reasons why analysis of quality comes so early in the list. Other factors for awakening, because it has to inform all the other ones. And make sure they stay pointed in the right direction.